Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nishant, and welcome to another episode of the Nishant Garg Show. The show is about extracting information on mindfulness, meditation, and personal development. I am on a mission to spread mindfulness awareness, and please join me in this movement. My today's guest is Mollie. Mollie is a creator of Sleep is a Skill, a company that optimizes how people sleep through a unique blend of technology, accountability, and behavioral change. The company was born from scratching her own itch after a lifetime of poor sleep habits, culminated into a mega challenging bout of insomnia for months without end. With a background in psychology and human behavior, she went down the rabbit hole to solve her own sleep disturbances without sleeping aids. She became fascinated with chronobiology and, by extension, its practical applications to restore a state of homeostasis not only to her sleep but also to her life as a whole. Knowing the difference between a life with sleep and without, she has now dedicated her life to sharing the forgotten skill set of sleep. So let's begin this episode. Mollie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. So, if you are in a social gathering and somebody asks you what you do for a living, how would your answer look like?
Sure. So, first off, I would say my name is Mollie McGlocklin, and I own a company called Sleep is a Skill that helps people optimize their sleep through technology, accountability, and behavioral change.
Sleep is a skill. Interesting. Can
Yes.
you explain that?
Sure. So this is something that I believe with every fiber of my soul, that in our modern day society, sleep has become a skill set. So to look at that, so say if we were to go back in time and go to hunter gatherer days, right, and try to make that argument, it could have landed or in a way that wouldn't align with how people would think about sleep previously. However, I'm basically making that argument that pretty much post Edison days of, right around the time when we were able to extend our days artificially in a way that we never quite could achieve before. There might be other hacks. So in the past, it was fire could extend the days a little bit. Maybe if you're wealthy, you could have some candles, maybe some lanterns later on in the timeline of human history. But largely, you were more time bound to this thing of the rhythms of nature. So sunrise and sunset had much more of a guiding force on your scheduling and how you lived your life. But now we really have been able to deviate from those schedules or those rhythms in a way that, while in one set of one particular paradigm is really empowering, from the perspective of sleep, since circadian rhythms are really governed deeply by our connection to light, is one of the top time givers for circadian rhythm.
What is circadian rhythm? For the people who do not understand this.
Yep, really good question. So circadian rhythm is simply for mammals, we operate on a 24-hour circadian rhythm. And so basically what that looks like is a 24-hour specter or timing of our days, and it follows this rhythmic format. And it's basically the sleep and wake drive that we exhibit. And since we basically function throughout the day, we're diurnal, we find that it's counter to nocturnal animals. So they have a whole different set of rhythms, right? So for us, with this 24-hour functioning, there are ways that circadian rhythm can be very robust and really operate on clockwork. Many of us are familiar with people that no matter where they go, what they do, they pretty much rise at the same exact time. They don't even need an alarm. And then there's others of us that are all over the place. And, any given day, it's a whole different schedule. So
Why do you
that,
think, sorry to interrupt you here. Why do you
yeah, no,
think
good.
that some people are waking up at the same time? And the reason I'm asking is I was watching one video from a sleep doctor, and he was saying if we sleep at the same time every single day, we can train our body so that we can wake up at the same time every single day without any timer or without any other thing.
Yeah, really a cool concept. So what that's sort of speaking to is the strength or the robustness of our circadian rhythm is very intimately linked with our consistency. So for sleep, consistency is absolutely king. That's one of the, abiding or overarching concepts that we are familiar with around sleep. And yet the practicality of implementing that for many people, it can occur as really quite radical to maintain a consistent sleep wake time 7 days a week, which is really what we're looking to achieve. Because many people will think that, oh, I pretty much do that. Yeah, absolutely. Monday through Thursday, maybe Monday through Friday. Absolutely.
And that's me.
Same-ish time. Right, exactly. And then there's the weekend. Then there's whatever days off you have. Then there's the event. So when those days come, then what we find is many of us engage in something that lands us with something called social jet lag. And social jet lag is an experience of it's almost as if we went on a trip and we're dealing with the jet lag the following day of just like, oh, I'm dragging and feel just so off. And that has to do with going to bed at such a deviation, from our norm, from our baseline, to the point. So what that might look like is normally, I go to bed around 10, and then come Friday and Saturday, now I'm going to bed at 2 or something, right? So with that, that's a decent deviation from our norm. And with that, it's as if you took this trip, but you didn't actually go anywhere. So not only do you deal with that social jet lag, then you're also dealing with something known as metabolic jet lag. So now what's likely is your meal timing is thrown off. So now these are a couple major cues to the body of letting the body know what time it is, because it's actually trying to maintain a particular schedule throughout the days. So by doing that, now you've really gone and confused yourself, and what happens is the quality of your sleep is impacted.
And what time do you usually go to bed?
So for me, it's been variable because of the fact that my boyfriend and I have been digital nomads for the past about 3 years. So we travel to all kinds of different spots on the globe. So kind of depending on what sunrise and sunset time is happening there. But right now, we're more aiming. We're more about the 11 to 7 time frame over here because we're on the West Coast and it largely aligns with sunrise and sunset.
So I want to ask you, how do you keep it consistent with your schedule when you are having tight schedule all the time? How can you be consistent with that sleep?
Yeah, great question. So with the consistency of the sleep, one, I think it really does help to begin with that why. So why are we doing this? Why is this so important? Because for many of us, it's like, oh, I know I should, but it's not really connecting the impact of the inconsistency. So often, so I really believe that that's why that concept of sleep as a skill is really important, because it's making the argument that in our modern day society, sleep has become a skill set. So, what do we do with any skill? We start at the beginning to essentially begin to raise our aptitude and our mastery of a particular skill. So, what is available is to start, sleep 101. What makes the difference? Why is this important? How will this impact my life if I don't do these things? And I think we're going through what I'm kind of referring to almost like a sleep renaissance or sleep reawakening right now, because, just only in really recent years has some of the more noteworthy impacts of sleep deprivation or chronic sleep deprivation hit more mainstream conversations. So what I mean by that is, for one thing, just in 2017, 3 guys won the Nobel Prize based on some of their findings in basically in circadian rhythms, understanding circadian rhythms more intimately. And then beyond that, more recently was some link ups between chronic sleep deprivation and neurodegenerative diseases that many of us are mindful of, of finding new ways of strategizing and ensuring that we aren't going down the paths of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and with this connection around sleep deprivation and these neurodegenerative disorders, we're seeing a lot more in everyday, press or news about this topic of why suddenly sleep becomes more important versus and veering off of that conversation that it used
Yes.
to get, right? Of, it's not sleep when you're dead, we don't need to, sleep is for the weak, all those kind of isms that no longer are fitting quite in the same way.
And the common myth is we don't need to sleep. While we are
Yeah.
sleeping, if we can borrow some time from our sleeping patterns, we can achieve more. Personally, if I do not sleep 7 to 8 hours, I am like a drunk man. I cannot
Yes.
operate functionally. Unfortunately, in last 2 days, I could not sleep. I slept 7 hours in last 2 days because there was so much going on and I didn't
Yes.
have time. I knew this is not good for my body, but I knew this is temporary, just 2 days. I can do it for maybe for a day or two, but it is not going to work in a long time. And you have
Yeah.
mentioned about chronic sleep deprivation. So, what do you think is the difference between chronic sleep deprivation and insomnia?
Yeah. Great question. So, insomnia, typically, what we'll see with insomnia is periods of, a heightened experience of real, troubling difficulty, falling asleep or staying asleep. So with that, it often can occur in acute bouts at different points in people's lives. Depending on if it's a, psychological issue, something has come up that's really certainly, on a more timely topic based on what's happening on the globe, many people are experiencing sleep difficulties. But often when it crosses the line into insomnia is when it's much more concentrated and severe of the sleep deprivation loss, whereas just chronic sleep deprivation can occur, for less than, so basically often what we're looking at is sub 7 hours of repeated experience of that, depending on, and this is very variable, by the way, because depending on different genders, different age groups, so different seasons of your life, there's a knowingness that the amount of our sleep changes. So don't get too hung up on the hours. But if we see that there's an insufficiency for people, even quantifiably, so if you were to hook them up on polysonogram and see some of the readouts as far as both time duration of their sleep and their quality.
And I
Then
think the
that's
quality depends on the REM.
it's one of the factors, sure. And you can't forget deep sleep and the architecture of how that's appearing. Absolutely, yeah.
Have you ever come across people who always say that they sleep for 8 hours, 10 hours, still they are tired, anxious?
Yes.
And
hmm
sometimes if I sleep for 6 hours, I'm super energetic. Sometimes I'm not feeling energetic even after 8 hours of sleep. And that is when deep sleep, getting into REM, the quality really matters. And
Yes.
do you think this 7 to 8 hour number is traditional now? It's not valid anymore. And because our lifestyle is changing.
So one of the largest studies that currently to date that looks at the time duration of sleep required to have, arguably it's very hard to judge like what's sufficient, what's not. But when they, run different tests around um, people's kind of aptitude, right? So if they're doing different tests and see how many errors they're making on a regular basis based on, for instance, that sub 7 line, as opposed to if they're within that 7 to 8 window and looking at the difference there. One of the things that seems to be some of the main takeaways is that that's more that area where we start to see what this part can actually be a little more concerning is that when people are often getting below 7 hours a night, and maybe they're in that kind of nice range between around 6 to 7 or 5.5 to 7, that they might not actually rate themselves as being particularly tired, or that it's not affecting them in any way, shape, or form. However, so their self-assessment is that, and then but their results as far as what comes out of their testing shows a very different reality where
How do
they're
you test that?
so, it's basically making more, are they making more errors, some kind of, simple math, some simple kind of logic, and getting a sense of, how are they able to handle some of these kind of basic tasks, and as compared to how they are when they're getting more sleep. So they, kind of restrict certain hours at certain times throughout the testing. And it's akin to when we've seen people testing as whether they're driving, and of course in closed areas and in a safe manner, but driving sleep deprived versus driving with sufficient sleep, and the difference we see in the precision abilities there.
Yes. I see huge difference in my productivity in my day-to-day life when I sleep really well. I'm super calm, I'm relaxed. I'm not anxious, I'm not getting frustrated. I'm super calm and relaxed if I sleep well. And I treat people in a nice way. I'm very kind to others. So there are a lot of
Yeah.
psychological benefits when we sleep well. And if we are not sleeping well enough, then we may be rude to somebody, because we are going through our emotions in that way. Some of my friends are polyphasic sleep, and polyphase, they sleep for 2 hours, 3 hours, and then they do something, and then they sleep. How do you think polyphase versus monophase
Yes.
is different?
hmm Yeah. So polyphasic is um, definitely a bit challenging, because now when we look at that as how that would run in a modern day society, with the already kind of confusing environmental signals that we're getting from our environment. So the extension of the days with the light, this overactive stimulus. So typically we're looking to really foster that kind of nice, reliable circadian rhythm where your melatonin is producing in the evening, you're dropping your body temperature, you're calming down, your brainwave states are kind of lowering, everything's sort of calming down real nice. However, in our modern day society, we've got Netflix, we got our phones, we got our laptops, we got the lights, we got, all this action. And also a society where many people are also sleep deprived around us. And, those numbers are rising. So you've got other people around acting as if this is kind of normal too. So all of these cues are confusing. Then you throw in kind of cutting our sleep architecture in ways that are kind of unfounded as far as the reliability or the concepts around that. Certainly haven't been proven by many of the studies that are out there right now. And unfortunately, what we usually see with that is the interruption of those sleep cycles in a way that doesn't allow you to achieve a rich quality of sleep that we've been speaking about in this conversation. So what that normally would look like in traditional sleep patterns is in the first half of the night is when we see slow wave sleep. And, that's particularly important for things like, as we're talking about the neurological concerns. So that's when you go through this process of lymphatic drainage, which is something that was only just kind of echoing or rippling into standard conversations more recently in the past few years. And it's this idea that basically in slow wave sleep, our brain is being pretty much washed out of all of this cellular waste product. And if it's not given the opportunity to do that, that's where this can build up of something called amyloid beta, which is basically
Yeah.
these hardened plaques that point to things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. So with that, we want to ensure that we're cultivating that time, even just for that during deep sleep. There's many more things that happen in deep sleep, but that's the first half. Then the second half typically is where we move more into REM sleep, and of course interspersed with light sleep. But if you are severing the sleep schedules throughout the day and the night arbitrarily with no real rhyme or reason, what's likely is a real potpourri of the type of sleep sleep stages that you'll be able to land with. And the challenge for that is if we'll, kind of refer back to this concept that consistency is king in the world of sleep, then what you're really doing is massively confusing the body. I mean, that's actually another kind of torture technique that's used to interrupt people while sleeping to confuse and be a part of brainwashing processes. So you have to remember that this has real both physical and mental consequences if not really done in
Yeah.
a strategic way.
And what could be the real benefits of good sleep on our health, overall well-being?
Oh, so good. Well, love that question. So number one, for sleep in general, one of the things that we talk about in sleep as a skill is that there's really three main elements to maintaining, resetting, or just getting great sleep, which is looking at both your psychology, your physiology, and your environment. So when any of those things are sort of thrown off, then there can be an experience of, maybe subpar sleep. But when you're getting those things all working in alignment and, your health is solid with, on a physical plane, your psychology is, really intact, you're handling things with, vigor and taking on your days in a way that's, count onable. And then your environment is set up responsibly and you're managing things in a way that really works. Then what you're left with is one, a life that's really working in a way that is exceptional. Two, you're left with this experience of having the tools necessary to garner and have a reliable experience of waking up with rejuvenation, feeling ready to take on the day. So those are
What are
some of
those
the.
tools?
So basically, you're able to then. So from a psychological perspective, you have that knowingness, but then from a quantifiable spectrum, what you can expect to see is lowered heart rate overall. If this has been something that you've been dealing with of chronic sleep deprivation, and then you begin to restore your sleep, often what we see is heart rate going down, heart rate variability (HRV), which is a really important metric for overall health and well-being, relates to our central nervous system. Improvements in that
How can we
stat.
measure that? How can we measure HRV?
So HRV is one that you can actually get on a lot of the current sleep trackers that are available. So just about every person that we work with at Sleep is a Skill at least wears the Aura Ring. And we do that mainly for a couple of reasons. One, because it's specific for sleep. And then two, because it will give us some of those readiness indicators that relate to our ability to be ready for the day, essentially, which is respiratory rate and your temperature and the arc of your heart rate throughout the night, specific to different points in your night and wake ups. So we do that. And then heart rate variability is one of the elements that they track on there as well. There's, many other trackers that will also bring that for you. And then you can also do that manually with some other trackers at particular times of the day. So some of the recommendations are when you first wake up, you take your HRV reading, and then you can get a consistent concept. Whereas, at end with some of these sleep trackers, they'll be pulled. Those numbers will be pulled for you throughout the night.
This is great information.
Yeah, it can really make a difference, because it can, one, you can see some tip-offs of if things are deviating. So like, again, in a timely conversation, or is actually working, and a couple of these trackers are working to basically create their own data mining to see if there's any sort of correlations between changes in the baseline and as it relates to the coronavirus. Because, one of the cool things that people that are wearing these, you can often, and so anyone listening that already has these, they're like, oh yeah, of course, you can tell if you are getting sick really before you might even have the cognition that that's what's happening. So you'll see, changes in your baseline where, so your temperature might go up more than normal, your heart rate might be rising, the arc of your heart rate throughout the night may change, wake ups, and then your HRV often will kind of tank.
And this is my personal question. Whenever there is so much going on in my life, sleep always affects
Yeah.
because the mind is active. Or if I'm
Yes.
prefer non-fictional book because my
Sure.
mind is constantly working. It's operational. I can feel that I'm having tough time in sleeping. It takes me longer time to get into my REM. And speaking of coronavirus, we are having all these anxieties, worries. We are living in this uncertain time these days. And I'm sure people may be affecting with their sleep because we are not sure what is going to come. There's a lot of unemployment. People are losing their jobs. So how can we cultivate good sleeping habits during these times?
Great question. Yeah. Because one of the primary kind of basic human needs, if you're even talking like Maslow hierarchy of needs, that some of the foundational part is to have some like that safety to be intact, the sense that you're going to be okay when you go into your bed at night, and that there's nothing sort of looming or something, awful that could happen. And unfortunately, there's a lot of uncertainty that's kind of hanging in the air for really the whole planet in a lot of ways, but for some people even disproportionately more than others, that they're really dealing with a lot, right? And in a quick period
Yes.
of time, and maybe something that they didn't plan for, all those variables, right? So with those things, one, what we then have to get even, what there's an opportunity is to get even more connected to some of these ways that we can bring structure and consistency. Because again, if sleep loves consistency, then we can help support that in a new way, even in the face of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So, in the midst of a global pandemic, what can we do? So, there's a couple of things. One, really support this concept of kind of bookending your days. So, starting your day and ending your day in a pretty intentional way that works for you and your.
And at the same time,
Yes, real big about that. And then the other thing that so within those time frames, what that would look like is really kind of connecting to those times is more sacred, where that's not really a time to bring in all the news, all the stress, all the go go go. Because what does that look like on a brainwave state? Because sleep is really just this kind of transition from awake brainwave patterns to sleep brainwave patterns.
and not trying to consume heavy information before going to
Yeah.
bed. And I'm guilty of it all the time.
Sure, totally.
I love to read
Yep, me too.
self-help
I know.
books, and
Yep.
sometimes it doesn't work. And but I remind myself this is not good. So
Yes.
I strongly believe having awareness is the key here. Sometimes we are going to miss all these things, but having awareness is the key. What do you think could be
Yeah.
the do's and don'ts before going to bed? One is not consuming information.
Right. Absolutely. And then the other do has to relate back to that circadian rhythm entrainment conversation. So when we say that phraseology, what that just means is that we're looking to entrain these rhythms into a way that's really consistent, count onable, and would mimic what for thousands of years humans already went through and experienced. And so bringing that back, since we've deviated so far in such a short period of time, really again back to the Edison conversation. So what does that look like? It looks like um, at post sunset that we really get responsible for our lighting in our environment. And so since that is one of the number one ways of cueing up our body to our master clocks, and also the thousands and thousands of little mini clocks that are throughout every cell in our body that are also all trying to stay on time.
What is
Um,
master clock?
so your master clock is basically, it's connected actually to your eyes. That's why it's so light sensitive. So it's the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that is known as this kind of ultimate timekeeper that's looking to really be the choreographer for all of these little miniature cells that have these little or miniature clocks within our individual thousands of cells. So we've got a lot of little clocks happening in our body, and because of that, then suddenly it becomes so important. The timing and the intensity of that light, because that's really what's used as the main barometer by which we choose what hormones to get released. That goes back to the mood and the feeling. And so that's also intimately tied with darkness. So melatonin is the hormone of darkness. So I make the argument that we're really living in a dark, deprived society because so many of us don't think much of it. I certainly didn't for many years before I went through my whole experience with sleep and really a transformation around my sleep because it was just I had tanked.
I would like to know that experience. What was your motivation to launch this
Yeah.
company, Sleep is Escape?
Yeah. So it's a wild ride for me. It was basically for many, many years, I was just a night owl and thought of myself as, outside the norm, always going to bed late. Um, I get my best work done late, all of this stuff, all this narrative about, kind of this idea or justification or rationalization around the way I was living my life, which for many years as a serial entrepreneur, then it looked like me going to bed as the sun was pretty much rising by the end of it. And so, and thinking that that was normal. And stress with businesses and what have you. And then, before officially becoming, a digital nomad, testing out by beginning to take the, business on the road with my boyfriend, or both of us are entrepreneurs. And so we began traveling, bringing jet lag into the mix of these already maladaptive sleep behaviors and stress and anxiety. And during that time, that was when I had my first experience of true insomnia, which I never experienced in my life. And it was a really real, excuse the pun, real wake up call in my life that something had to change because it was now impacting my health and well being. And I felt really powerless and many times just completely hopeless around what to do. And so it was a real struggle for, many months. And then through my pretty obsessive nature, which probably landed me there in the first place, but it actually ended up being my saving grace because then I really went down the rabbit hole, tried just about everything you could possibly do in the world of sleep. And then so some things stuck, some things didn't. And then once I began to restore my relationship with my sleep, then I had it in such a new regard because now I'd seen what life actually looked like without sleep, and it was not pretty. So then there was a new type of resolve to I'm gonna like really, really transform this area. And so from that, now like fast forward, suddenly standing in that place, it's the having the tools and the sense of knowingness and empowerment to be able to be at the source of great sleep consistently for myself has just been a game changer. So out of that, it really grew originally as a passion project and just working with people that were having difficulties because I was so empathetic because I had been there. But then it began to be, one-on-one trainings and small groups. And flash forward to today, now we have online courses, the Sleep is a Skill podcast. So a whole world has gotten created out of what for me was just something that I had wanted when I was going through this because I basically wanted like somewhere to go. So,
Yeah, I acknowledge you for
right?
that.
Yeah, it's an interesting area because for me at the time it felt very shameful. It doesn't always feel like that for many people, but for me it felt like this, how am I not being able to do something so basic and arguably primal? And yet it wasn't coming. Sleep was not coming.
Yeah.
So it
Uh,
was really important.
do you think taking sleep pills can cure insomnia?
So, unfortunately, so first I'll share my experience. So, when I was at my worst with my sleep, I was actually in Croatia at the time, and I had never experienced something like this. And, I had a lot of band aids back in the day before, like in the States. I'd have like my certain types of over the counter things. Oh, if it's really bad, I'll take whatever, Unisom or these different over the counter things you can get in the United States. But when I had gone to Croatia, they didn't, have those things. There was herbal remedies at the pharmacy and what have you. So suddenly this flared up my fear anxiety factor because I wasn't sleeping. And then, oh no, the normal band-aids that I would normally go to aren't there. And, I've now reached this tipping point where now I'm just so like anxious and sleep deprived that just all of those normal rational states of being you're not there, you're just dragging. So I went to the doctors actually about this topic, and they were great, but they had about 5 minutes with me, and they basically prescribed their version of Ambien. And like we literally had to use Google Translate. Like
Yeah.
that was the whole experience, and that's what they gave me. And in that moment, there was a real sort of a mix of both relief because it felt like, okay, I need something, and I would normally never be taking anything like this of the identity that I knew myself to be. But here I am now about to take a pill to go to sleep. So that felt really confronting because I didn't line up with who I thought or knew myself to be. So, so I will say on the one hand, it actually was helpful during that short period of time. But on the other hand, there's so many things that this does not fulfill as a real long-term strategy. So number one, so what we find is that the type of sleep that comes out of some of these, in the past, these benzodiazepines often were utilized, but now often these kind of hypnotics that we see a lot of, and also kind of a hybrid version of that for some people is they take like a cocktail of things. So with that, like what unfortunately and I'm not trying to be flippant with any of this because I know it can be so painful and challenging and, and what have you. But at the same time, the results are very concerning around, what we see for the type of sleep that people get, not only just, night to night, the architecture that we've been discussing that we're really aiming for looks very, very different. And then in addition to that, then you're dealing with the half-life of some of these, depending on how much people are taking and how regularly and often needing to up the dosage. So then you've got many hours in the morning where you're arguably still sedated based on, your body makeup. So how big a person you are, how much dosage you're taking, how quickly you're able to metabolize those things. And then we've got people driving on these things.
So it's not good in the long term.
Definitely not good in the long term. Not a good long term strategy. And even though on the label it's suggested as a short term, solution, we often don't see that used in practicality. It seems to be a long term thing.
And to get a really good sleep, what would you recommend, or what's the must to do list before going to bed?
Yeah. So if we go back to that post-sunset concept, so the sun's setting, that's when you want to optimize your light environment and start bringing in darkness in your particular way. So for the true like biohackers, they might bring in red lighting. There's a whole philosophy onto the why of that, but that's one element. And then fire, candlelight, or other things that you can bring in. Worst case, if you're a big no for those things. Then incandescent lights can be another option because they have a higher percentage of red.
So does it mean that total darkness is not good?
So we absolutely want total darkness at when you're going right to bed. But this is all in the lead up because part of the problem is many of us only think about sleep right when we're getting into bed. But that's already when you're kind of missing the boat because there's a whole lead up time that is designed in the circadian rhythm to begin to sort of downshift before bed. So this is the stuff you want to do a few hours. So really you want to ideally align it with sunset so that you're really connected with the rhythms of nature. So then you start turning down the lights, you like make it much more calming, relaxing. You turn down the temperature so you make it cooler. And
it all requires some investment. I would like to ask you if somebody who cannot afford. I'm asking this because growing up, we did not have air conditioning in our family, and I can feel it. It used to be hot, and it impacted the quality of sleep. I'm talking about 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So how can somebody have good sleep without having to invest money in red lights, getting air conditioned? In United States of America, this is still, we can still get it, but in other parts of the world, this is luxury.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a great point. So in other parts of the world, so if you think of akin to camping, so that's where you really have not a whole heck of a lot of anything, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, part of my whole philosophy is something called the desert island approach, where you have really nothing but the clothes on your back, and you're looking to be able to land on a desert island and get yourself the great sleep that you need. Um, so so with that, so having that personal control, even without all the gadgets and gizmos, one, it would actually be one of the most basic things, because now you're able to arguably save money and cut the electricity and pretty much start like bringing the lighting down so much earlier. So one, doing that. And as far as the temperature element of things, then that's something that you'd have to really do some creative work on your environment, to whether or not you need to start modulating the amount of light that's coming in that might be heating up your environment and keeping your bedroom area much darker throughout the day. There are some smaller investments that you could make to make a difference. So say like there's things called bed jet, that is like a fan that you put at the end of your bed. So maybe you're not able to do air conditioning, but maybe you could have that kind of fan at the bottom. There's also things called chili pad that can have like one cooling system on your bed. So all of those would be other alternatives to air conditioning. But if you truly just can't, afford any of those, then you'd have to, set up a situation. Maybe it's like utilizing fans, maybe it's utilizing cold therapy. So that's looking like,
Yeah. And
yeah,
taking control of the environment. It can be in any way. If we can take control of our surrounding environment, we can improve our quality of sleep. And I'm
yeah,
having this
absolutely.
funny question in my mind right now.
Oh,
That
shoot. I think you cut out for a second. What was that last
okay,
part?
can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
I'll edit it out. Okay.
Okay. No
So
worries.
I'm having this funny question in my mind right now. Sex before bed, is it going to improve our quality of sleep, or is it going to delay our REM time?
Um, so basically that can be a great strategy if one, if you're connected to what type of patterns you usually gauge with your partner. So one, the experience of oxytocin and the release of cortisol that you do get from those sort of bonding moments are fantastic. And then not even just left for the couples, but also, sex tech is making a big splash from a wellness perspective. So you can also, even if you're, single guy, single woman, there's also all kinds of different, things that you can utilize to ensure that this is a real strategy, It's like basically sexual wellness, and anything that you can do to calm the body and the mind before bed can be fantastic. But if we're looking at the patterns, that's why I was mentioning with the patterns with the couple, seeing if for you, is there after this, like how long of a period on average, is that experience for you, and how long do you need to kind of like ramp down from that to cool off, essentially. So you just want to strategically put that into, because it's almost like a little mini workout in some
Planning.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just
I
being
was,
mindful of that.
yeah. So speaking of mindfulness, would you suggest any mindfulness practice, such as meditation or any other mindfulness practice, to get a good sleep?
Yeah. So, because a lot of the people that are coming to me, sleep is a skill, and certainly where I was at when I was, having all my sleep difficulties, it's often very common to have these hyper aroused states when you're looking to go to bed, which is kind of the opposite that we're looking to cultivate. Um, so, one, if you want to get kind of biohackery with it, there's a product called the Muse, which is a wearable headband, that kind of brain sensing headband. And that one will essentially read kind of EEG readouts, so that you can get a sense of the brain states that you're able to achieve at different points of meditation. If you're not like to there, what can be powerful about that is that provides biofeedback, so we can start to be connected to and responsible for the states that we're kind of going into and how often we're hanging out there.
Do you think
Mhm.
using all this technology for sleep is good? Because I'm on the fence to using all these technologies. What do you think? That is using technology will going to benefit? in a long term?
So you want to be really strategic with the use of tech. So right now, this is a big problem, sleep. So you're going to see a lot. Not only do we already see a lot of sleep tech, but what's coming is even more. So anytime there's a big problem in our society, obviously from a capitalistic perspective, we want to capitalize off of that. So there's a lot of tech that is really, some that can be really, really useful and eye-opening, and then some that it's, sort of possibly creating this crutch that's unnecessary.
And we need to talk to experts before using any technology.
Yeah, well, and it depends on what our goals are, what we're getting into. Technically, things like indoor lighting is technology. There's many things that we engage in without examining it that are already tech based, and then there's more things that we could, and a lot of this for sleep is actually about stripping away things. So largely, what we're finding is utilizing things like circadian rhythm intermittent fasting, where you're ending your meal timing much earlier, really being mindful of alcohol, because that's a real number in your sleep.
And what time, how many hours before your sleep do you eat?
Oh, I'm more extreme. Like, not necessarily do people have to do this, but mine are much more earlier in the afternoon. So you're looking to, but at least by a general rule, aiming to have your meal timing as close to sunrise, like within sunrise and sunset. And that's called circadian rhythm intermittent fasting.
Interesting. And my last question would be to you is, what would be few strategies you would like to share with the listeners so that they can really apply that into their personal life and get a good sleep?
So a few strategies that we want to do is really, number one, really win the days so that we can conquer our nights. So looking at the days newly, and with one strategy underneath that, so it kind of goes into number two, is if you get nothing else out of this conversation, then this one thing that you start your day getting a massive amount of light in your eyes, first thing, really getting outside, because the sunlight, full spectrum light, is much, much different than the light inside. And by doing that for at least 20 to 30 minutes every day, that can make a huge difference on the quality of your sleep as you get to the night. And we'll need longer to kind of go into the details of why that is, but essentially, doing that one thing can make a big difference in the normalizing of your circadian rhythm and helping produce great melatonin at night. And then the third thing is then bringing back the darkness, bringing back darkness. So we want to have a lot more darkness that we're kind of okay with playing with than many of us are right now in our evenings, and see what that does to our sleep.
Not using any screen before going to bed.
Right. And then if you are, using some screens within a few hours before, there's lots of things that you can do. So you can get red light filters. You can, and it doesn't cost a thing. At least, with your smartphone, whatever smartphone you have, you can get red light filters on there. Just Google it and they'll show you how to set it up. And by doing that, you'll also notice the difference that you feel as far as, I'm surprisingly more tired right now than I normally would be. And it has something to do with that circadian rhythm cues.
Well, Mollie, thank you so much for all your experience, insights, and wisdom. I hope listeners will definitely take something out of this conversation. And I wish we talk again very soon.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time. I really had a great experience just going deep with this on this topic that I love and I know you love as well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast with Mollie. You can follow her work at Instagram @Molliemcglocklin, and Facebook ID is @Sleep is a Skill. Her website is https://www.sleepisaskill.com. If you have enjoyed listening to my podcast, please subscribe to the new podcast updates at my website, https://nishantgarg.me, and please provide your reviews on iTunes, which will really, really help me. So thank you again.